This is RJ Eskow, and we are back on We Act Radio. This is Take Action News. And, talking about the social contract, what's more fundamental than the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And of those three, what's more fundamental than the right to stay alive? Our next guest is Cliff Schecter. Cliff is certainly a part of the We Act Radio family. I hope you listen to his program. And he is also with the National Gun Victims Action Council. We've talked about gun issues before, Cliff and I. And Cliff, I don't know how to start this interview except to say, do we even know how many people were shot in America's schools in the past week?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, RJ. Sorry that, I guess most of the topics we have to discuss are not that uplifting, sadly. No, I don't have a total of how many, but, what I can tell you is it was, 10 days ago that shooting happened in Roswell, New Mexico, at the middle school, that was one of the ones that sort of got through the media sphere, so to speak, that people actually were talking about and upset about. And it would probably shock most people to know that we've had 4 since then in the last 10 days. So we've averaged one school shooting every other day the last 10 days. That's part of a pattern of 35 school shootings since Newtown. Which is absurd. And obviously we're not counting things like, here we're talking about just schools and not even talking about things like people getting shot in movie theaters over texting and what goes on out in our neighborhoods and on our highways and in malls. And you think of as you put it, the fundamental right to life, and quite frankly, when the right always talks about the Second Amendment, which they never seem to understand exactly as it was written, there are these other rights in the preamble of the Constitution, among them domestic tranquility and the general welfare. I'm not sure why those are never taken seriously, because we've got a serious issue here where we have neither of those.
Well, this gets me back to an online debate I had with a gun, I would describe him, zealot, where he kept calling me anti-gun, and I finally... Why don't we leave it at that? I mean, the idea that somehow there is a Second Amendment right to possess a gun, which is questionable legal theory at best. And by the way, according to my research, the only other nation that makes a similar argument is Yemen, and Yemen is reevaluating it. That the idea that not only does such a right exist, but that it supersedes the other rights, domestic tranquility, the other rights, the right to stay alive that you mentioned, is extraordinary to me. And of course, it's a cultural issue, and it goes back to the great work of the author of Gunfighter Nation and others about the role of the gun in American culture. But it's devastating to me when anybody gets shot. Any innocent person gets shot, a very frequent occurrence. Somehow it's especially heartbreaking when school shootings take place. And I didn't mean to catch you off guard with that first question, but my point is that there are so many.
You didn't. And I'm sorry. Go ahead, RJ. Sorry.
Well, no, of course. There are so many. It's hard to keep track of them. At what point does social and human outrage and grief turn into substantive policy change, especially in the wake of what happened after Newtown, which was very little? And what do we do to make it happen? I admire you for being there in the trenches on this. What can people do to push this issue?
And, I'll just say quickly, it's sickening and sad as it is. We now have to update, because I'm now seeing across the AP there was just a shooting at South Carolina State in a dorm. Oh. So now we can add another one to the list. What we need to do is we need to fight hard, and we have been fighting, and we've won in some places. I mean, we've gotten a number of states have passed, not as comprehensive laws as I would want, but passed laws with background checks and banning assault weapons. Colorado, notably, which is a purple state. Nevada, the legislature passed it, and the governor vetoed it, who's a Republican, and we're going to try again. And in numerous other states, including Washington, Maine, Minnesota, and others, came very close to doing it. and in at least Washington, they're going to now put it on the ballot in 2014. So people get this. Most people understand that this is not the way it's supposed to be. We do have a history of the gun in this country, but you know what? Canada had the same history. Australia, notably, had the same history. And after their Port Arthur massacre in 1996, where I think over 30 people were killed by somebody who shouldn't have had a gun, who had assault weapons, they passed a whole series of laws. And not only have their homicides plummeted there, but their suicides have, because statistics will tell you that the most effective way to kill yourself by far is with a gun. If you don't have a gun, you're only successful about 20% of the time, and most people don't even who decide to commit suicide do it in a couple of minutes, and if they survive, they often don't try again. So this is a public health catastrophe, and what people need to do. 100,000 people a year are getting shot in this country. Over 10,000 up to 12,000 are murders, 18,000 suicides. This is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not the way a civilized country acts. You made the right comparison. We're in the class of countries like Yemen, not the ones you would think to compare us to. And, we need to do everything possible. Look, Travis County, Texas, which is where Austin is, just passed a county law where they're now going to enforce background checks at all their gun shows there. They're looking to do the same thing in Burlington, Vermont. So on the city level, on the county level, when it comes to boycotting businesses, you pointed out I work with the National Gun Victims Action Council. We started a boycott 2 years ago against Starbucks, who was allowing open carry in their stores, even though they wouldn't allow the same thing, of course, at the corporate headquarters where guns were banned. After other groups joined in and we pressured them, they changed their policy a few months ago. It's a cultural fight, it's a political fight, and it's a public health fight, and we need to engage in all those arenas with great policy research, with in taking on politicians that won't do the right thing, and quite frankly, taking on organizations that won't do the right thing.
I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm so glad you're also mentioning some successes. And the temptation, and I'm just gonna cop to it right away. The temptation is, whenever you're talking about guns, at least the temptation with a guy like me is to suddenly become flippant about something like the Starbucks thing. And I said tall soy latte punk, that kind of thing. But the fact is, it's no joke, though. We're talking about children. We're talking about teenagers in colleges and people at the age of 20 and 21. We're talking about professors. We're talking about teachers. We're talking about guys who, it's rude to text in the movie theater, but, family emergency or whatever. We're talking about an epidemic, a public health epidemic of murder, suicide, and kind of cultural insanity. So I'm delighted to hear you talk about some victories on this. And, one of the things, besides the public policy changes, we got to change people's minds, too.
That's right.
I myself have used guns recreationally for many years. I haven't done it in quite a while, honestly, since Newtown. It moved something in me. Up to that point, I was a semi-regular gun range and so on. I can't do it anymore. That's just me. But the point is that, you don't have to be, I first fired a gun when I was 8. You don't, obviously with my father, but you don't have to be a radical peacenik or love child to say that we need to have a sane gun policy. So I guess as my last question to you, what can we do, if anything, to help you change people's heads about this, and where can people go to get more information?
Well, it's exactly what you're talking about right now is how you do it. Because, look, you're talking about how you've used guns in the past. You started when you were 8. When I was in my early teens, I used to go to camp up in New Hampshire. I used to shoot on a riflery team. I didn't grow up hating guns. I've still got these little NRA medals that my wife thought it was funny to present to me on my 40th birthday recently because of how I take them on. What people can do is what you're doing, which is make sure they get the right information. I would encourage people to go to a variety of places, but gunvictimsaction.org. Is with the group I work for, the National Gun Victims Action Council. There's numerous other groups out there. You can look up the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, the Brady Campaign. And get yourself educated about this. I mean, understand that we are way out of whack here. This is not something where we're fighting to ban all guns, and the idiocy and the crazy black helicopter talk that comes from the Tea Partiers. Their talk on guns is just as silly as their talk on the economy. I'll leave you with this.
And we'll have to leave it there, but
Okay.
Cliff, I want you to know, I think I have a right to drive a car too, but not to buy a tank and roll up on an elementary school. So
Yes.
we'll get this balance. We'll get it right. We'll keep trying. Keep up the good fight, man, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me on, buddy.
You bet. My pleasure. We will be right back on Take Action News after this break, talking about a bizarre 1984-ish event in the Ukraine involving cell phones and the police state. Please stick with us. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is Take Action News.